Thanks, Scott. I know about 25% of you are here, but how many of you are familiar with forest certification? Maybe less than 20% of you. Well, the reason why I put some extra slides in here is I wanted to give you a backdrop on it, and I thought certification would be a good topic to introduce into this symposium, because there's a lot of elements to it that I think are kind of important. We've spoken about a lot of them today. One thing that I think that certification can bring to the table here, and I'm not privy to a lot of the previous discussions that have gone on before this meeting, and we'll be experiencing the panel discussion tomorrow, but I think this could be a point of certification, of consensus through certification. One thing I will say, I was wearing my researcher MSU hat this morning, and even though right after lunch, even though I'm identifying myself as coming from the Department of Forestry, Mississippi State, I will say that none of these comments reflect on the opinions necessarily of Mississippi State or the Department of Forestry, that they're really just emanating from me. Okay, models of certification. The reason why I bring in certification is because a lot of people don't know anything about it, and a lot of people have. You can't hear me? Oh, jeez. The reason why I bring up certification is because a lot of people don't know much about it, and they have a lot of misconceptions, and I think there's some misconceptions here that we can straighten out that have relevance to the topics that we're discussing here. Basically, there's a lot of models of certification. People hear a forest certification and they think, well, it only has to do with the forest. Well, primarily there is a lot of forest management for the forest products industry, the public sector, consultants can get involved, and of course private landowners. There's the chain of custody aspects, and then the non-timber forest products. One thing about certification, and I'm talking mostly about the major systems, they're non-governmental. And one of the reasons why they started evolving, one of the reasons is to ward off government regulation and government interference. And I think for the most part, it has done that. A lot of people feel that certification is driven by the government or the UN or something like that. It doesn't. And basically, it's in order to properly do it, those that get certified undergo what we call third-party independent audits, and then there's a labeling system involved with that. For forest management, we have the management standards and the chain of custody monitoring, and I'll get into that. Independent audits, and of course, they seek to have endorsement from a broad constituency, but because there's a lot of misinformation going around about it, that thing is not as big as they would like it to be, but I can tell you right now, be aware of it because it's growing. Benefits of certification, well, I'm not going to read all of these. Some of the things that I've highlighted a little bit differently is we all think of certification sometimes as an environmental approach to management of natural resources. And I do have a pointer here. The economic aspects is what I'm going to be concentrating on. And one of the reasons why I developed this talk, one of the reasons is that certification stands on a lot of different, on a foundation with three pillars. One is the economic, one's the social, and one is the environmental. And a lot of people just emphasize the environmental and don't realize there's a very strong economic component involved with it. Okay, collaborating with industry. Here we're getting back to the economics, okay? Forestry and forest products industry, those that do know a lot about certification understand that this is mostly where their knowledge level emanates from, but there's a lot of non-timber forest products. You might have seen some bananas in your supermarket with Rainforest Alliance labels. Sometimes the coffee in your hotel has it. Seems to be cropping up everywhere. So they also certify non-timber forest products, agriculture, and also tourism. Okay, one thing to understand about certification primarily, whether you want to believe it or not, it's a tool that links consumers to producers. So you're growing trees, you're cutting trees, you're not cutting every tree, and you are delivering, storing, packaging, and you go right there to the marketplace as a sustainable product, as long as this stuff is being done according to what auditors view as appropriate forest management. The word you would like was probably sustainable. Okay? Here are the organizations you need to know, and you probably wonder, how do I fit in? I'm not promoting one system over another. I'm just promoting the system I'm most familiar with. I'm allowed to consult at MSU as a 12-month appointee. The people that hire me call me a subcontractor. I just call myself a consultant. I've done a lot of different certification work in the past, but primarily what I do is I get hired by the Rainforest Alliance, which used to be called Smartwood, but it changed because they had 5, 6, 7 programs. They were all called Rainforest Alliance, and this one was called Smartwood, and they decided to get rid of the beloved little name that we all like, and they changed it to that. Anyway, what the Rainforest Alliance is they have been audited themselves and undergone through a rigorous process to be able to do these third-party audits for FSC certification. And that's the logo that you'll probably see. An independent organization sets standards, and they also develop these third-party auditors. They approve, in the United States, there's about 4 major ones that operate. Rainforest Alliance is one of them. They set the standards. And some of you have been involved in setting those standards, I know, in some of the working groups. Okay, so they're accredited to certify operations for FM and COC. And who do? They do companies, governmental agencies, universities, private landowners, environmental, and NGOs, non-governmental environmental organizations. The only entity that really isn't certified are federal government units, and that's because there's a long story behind that. There's 2 parcels of land in the United States that are FSC certified by the I don't know if it's by the Rainforest Alliance, but they're FSC certified. One happens to be Fort Lewis out west. The other one is some unknown, to me anyway, BLM landholding out west as well. And basically this guy comes along and uses these standards and audits these entities and see if they are in conformance with the standard. Now, one thing I'll tell you about certification, and a lot of people don't understand it, it is not prescriptive. I personally, and this is why they got away from calling me a consultant, is I'm not allowed to consult. If somebody is out of conformance with a part of the standard, we just tell them they're out of conformance. It doesn't mean that they're not doing a good job, but they're not in conformance with whatever they're doing. And there's a number of ways of getting into conformance, and I'm not going to tell them how to get there. I'm just going to say, write it up and say X, 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 X. You need, the way I usually do it is you're at A and you need to get to C, conformance. We don't tell you what B is. The one thing about the Forest Stewardship Council and certification in general is it all started out with massive deforestation, particularly in the tropical rainforests. The reason why, and I keep, getting the Italian in me, and I keep clipping this button here. I got to go back. I talk more with my hands than anything. The irony of it all is it started out with tropical deforestation, but less than 5% of the forest land in the world is certified. Most of it is in the temperate areas, and the reason is because those third world countries and nations, whatever you want to call them, businesses, there's no social and economic infrastructure to support the environmental integrity of those land bases. And that's why the whole thing collapses. That's one of my messages here today. In the United States, on certified lands, that you have to have this economic component and economic sustainability, and that'll become clear here. Some of the items here, the mission of the council, I'll just point out here, you have to have environmentally appropriate, socially beneficial, and economically viable management. We all talk about generous landowners, generous companies, generous this, generous that. I have to tell you that unless they have the economic sustainability to be able to maintain their properties and manage their properties appropriately, unless they're one of the Gateses, you need to be economically viable to be able to do the other things that many of you in this room want to see. That would be certain types of wildlife habitat implementation, etc. Much of it goes away if the landowner isn't economically viable and socially viable as well. Okay, certification, response to evolving marketplace. I will tell you that it's growing in the United States, and in particular, it's growing in the South. You may not think it's growing in Mississippi, and it isn't growing as fast as in Mississippi as it is in other southern states. And they've held on to it. There's a lot of reasons for that. I can explain that to you. Otherwise, I run out of time if I went into it right now. The one thing that I think we can look at certification, especially since most of you didn't raise your hands that you knew something about it. It's a tremendous tool for reaching a consensus on a number of issues. And if we're talking about wildlife habitat and economic sustainability, I've seen it work time and time again. You know, if you think that organizations can't do it, I can tell you right now that there are organizations that do it all. And so we can reach a common ground. Okay, it's voluntary, non-regulatory. Third party is very important. Okay, this is the one thing to carry home. It's a balanced approach: social, environmental, and economic. You have to be sustainable in all three of those areas, or the whole thing collapses. Okay, structure of certification, we have the landowner, we have the umbrella, which is the FSC in this case, and we could talk about another system. I just picked the one that I've been working with for 14 years and know the best. We have the certifier, we have the managers, we have forest products industry, and then we have the general public, which are the consumers and the stakeholders. A lot of the misnomers and misunderstanding in the general public and amongst the special interest groups, they either don't know about certification, or they have a slanted view of it, or misconceptions concerning it. I'll talk about these 10 principles here. One thing about the FSC standard, there's the same 10, in the United States we had regional standards. We now have one standard with regional differences. These 10 principles in the United States are the same 10 principles throughout on any standard that you will deal with. Okay, and then of course the label is important, and I put a product here because the key part about this is we want people to buy products from those organizations that are producing sustainable products. And it's just starting to work after this thing's been around for 20, 25 years. It's been wished to death. It's almost died. It's been struggling, but it's really starting to take off in my mind with my experience, at least in the United States. Bottom line, improve corporate product image, credibility with customers, good press and publicity, healthy and productive and sustainable forests. Like I said, if the landowner is economically sustainable, they can do the things that you want them to do. Now, some of these things are mandated by law. If you go to California, all you got to do is jump over one fence and you're certified, because the state ties you up almost every which way from Sunday. But down south, where maybe some of the laws aren't that restrictive, there are companies that are voluntarily becoming certified, and they're able to do what needs to be done to conform to some of these standards. And these are just some numbers, which I don't have time to go over, on the number of certificates, both chain of custody and on acres of land. Some things on the Rainforest Alliance. They too mimic the FSC in the fact that they implement the global standards for sustainable management, monitor and evaluate organizations, educate industry. And here's some data on what the Rainforest Alliance does. They are the biggest certifier, at least in acreage, in the world, amongst all the third-party certification units. Okay, same principles that I brought up before. These are just the same exact principles that we do land management with. And I brought this up as what is certification assess, and sometimes you don't know how this is going to come off visually, but I think it's working. What I did is every one of these, there's an economic benefit to every single one of these, either direct or indirect, tangible in dollars, or intangible because you love something, okay? But what I did here is there's some here that have a lot of cash value implications. I think we've mentioned this. Darryl was talking about recreational opportunities. We've talked about silviculture and how important that is. Monitoring practices, management planning, harvesting practices, utilization of wood, the annual allowable cut. So I just highlighted some of those. Okay, now what I did for you here is I'm going to get involved with putting parts of the standard up here. And this is to show you, the standard is like 164 pages long, but I took little pieces out of those 10 principles, and sometimes I put the principles up, and sometimes I put, we have principles, criteria, and indicators. Principles are the same worldwide. Criteria and indicators are different depending upon where you come from. But I wanted to put this one up. Principle 7 is the management plan, okay? Management plan and supporting document shall provide. I think we had a talk earlier by Tedrick on how few management plans we have, which is not a good way to go in my mind. I think you need to spend a little money to manage your property right and even make a little money if that's one of your objectives. So right away in the standard, you have to have management objectives. Doesn't mean that they're set in stone and you can't change them. But you have to have justifiable management objectives. And it would differ by industry, differ by private landowner, different by agency. A lot of state agencies are certified, a lot of them. And they have to be more fiscally responsible now ever before. This one here, description of silvicultural other management system based on the ecology of the forest in question and information gathered through resource inventories. And then, of course, the rationale for the annual harvest, species selection, provisions of monitoring, and forest growth and diameter. So, see, a lot of the special interest groups think that the FSC and the Rainforest Alliance is some kind of a, let's put it this way, it's more of an everyday dogwood alliance that people can grab upon, okay? But it's not anything like that at all. It in itself is not a special interest group. It doesn't have an agenda. 2 minutes left. I'm getting to the end. Put up criteria 5, which is benefits from the forest. And I just wanted to point out here, under benefits of the forest, strive towards economic viability by taking into account the full environmental, social, and operational costs of production and ensuring the investments necessary to maintain the ecological productivity of the forest. So I'm not pushing certification, but I know from the way some of you are thinking in the room and the way some of the others are thinking in the room, this is a point where I think some in the room can say, you know, we've reached consensus here on some of these issues and done it very well. Okay, 8 is monitoring. You got to monitor the yield of forest products. You got to do cost, productivity, and efficiency of forest management. Now, some of this stuff is not as intense for what we call family forests. And one of the reasons why certification is taking off in the United States, particularly in the South, is along with the new standard that they developed that has regional differences, they now have the family forest indicators that are embedded into it. And these family forest group memberships have been cropping up all over the South in particular, but in other parts of the country too. Number 10 is plantations. A lot of people think you can't have plantations. You can have plantations. They just have to comply to the standard. Enhance economic, ecological, and social stability. Again, one of the indicators under this criteria, this is a criteria under Principle 10, Criteria 3, and you have to have economic stability of the local community. If plantations are contributing to that, you say, well, how is that done? Well, it's another product that can be brought to market. It employs loggers, it employs people that work in the mills. It also generates a profit for the company so that they can preserve some areas in natural forest and manage for RT&E species, and it goes on and on. Number 4, it goes back, and I put these in order of importance for the talk, not in order of the way they would show up. Obviously, criteria 4.1, the forest owner manager participates in local economic development or civic activities. And I put this down because everybody likes to talk about how generous companies are, how generous landowners are. I can tell you with rare exceptions, the generosity would not come about, at least in the quantity and maybe even in the quality of how these donations or use of the land base or whatever, unless they were viable, unless they are economically viable, and then they can become socially viable as well. Chain of custody, and this is a repeat of this one, and some other things related to that, and I'll end with the summary, okay? Organization objectives, whether mandated or freely chosen, are of paramount importance. Darn it. Just when I needed the time. That's what happens when you get an Italian up here with 2 things. Scott, help me. I just need that last slide.
Let's give him a round of applause.
Well, see, if you all knew about certification, all I needed was 2 slides. Okay, let me put these things down real quick. Organization objectives, whether mandated or freely chosen, are of paramount importance. I think we've seen that. Industry has different objectives. Landowners have multiple objectives, some of which are economic, some of which are privacy, etc. And of course, agencies have different ones, but they have to be more fiscally responsible than ever before. Make no mistake about it, and the focus for this talk for me, because I'm giving this again in another venue, certification stresses economic sustainability on a par with social and environmental considerations. That's a fact. That's not my opinion. It just is that people don't understand that. Land management is the owner's prerogative, but if they want to be certified, they must be in conformance with the standard. It is voluntary. I can tell you people drop out, people come in, and it turns out to be what they thought it was, and sometimes it turns out to be not so much. FSC US standard is not prescriptive. In other words, going from where you are to conformance can be accomplished in more than one ways, and we don't really tell them how to do it, which means if you're going to take a particular brand of silviculture, we're not going to tell you how to manage your forest when you've been doing it for 50 years, and we're going to come in and say, well, you should be doing it this way, I think, or maybe this way. So I'll end it with that. Is there one question? I'll take one question, and if not, I can be available. Yes?
You talked about social sustainability comes subsequent to economic sustainability, and I wonder if that's the sort of thing that's simultaneous.
It's which came first, chicken and the egg? If you look at some of the indicators on social sustainability, a lot of it means that you give preferences to local loggers, local contractors, etc. Well, you can't be doing that if you're not harvesting the forest. So you have a market for your product, and you can harvest it and sell it, so you can hire local people. Maybe you make donations to the community, to schools. You know, I have confidentiality, but I know examples where the donations are made to schools, donations are made to churches, etc. So, companies, some of these companies have been around for an awful long time. Landowners, generational, and so it's kind of hard to say which came first for an established organization, really. But people are getting credit under this system for doing things they've always done.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. It's a lot of fun to be here. I'm in the stage of my career where everything is fun. So, and I have a very unique position at UT. I'm actually 100% extension, but I do teach silviculture. And at silviculture at UT, all the wildlife and fisheries majors have to take silviculture, so it makes it very robust. And I also have several grad students, so I keep my finger in research and probably do more than I need to do, but it's good. And then outreach, adult education, continuing education, extension activities. I do something different every day. It's a lot of fun. I want to recognize Randy Russo. He had a conflict and couldn't be here today. Thus, when we get to the genetics slides, I'm just going to go through them real quick because I'm not a geneticist. Purpose for today is to give you some ideas on some afforestation in the bottomlands and some of the alternatives associated, and some research into forest stand dynamics, both from a natural and from an artificial standpoint, to try to simulate natural stands. Is this working okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. So can we have both conservation values of high-grade hardwoods and planted stands? And emphatically, yes. But we need to plan ahead and decide what we desire and how are we going to get there. And there's probably several different ways to get there. And that will depend on your biological, your social, your economic type situations. Common goals. We'd like to simulate natural stands. How many planted stands look natural to you folks? I always have folks that say trees planted in straight lines can't be natural. Look at diverse flora and fauna. Complex, we usually want a complex forest with several canopy layers, mixed species, and how many people plant mixed species stands? We're beginning to do that now, but 20 years ago we didn't. The wildlife habitat mask, most of our cost share programs are for conservation values. So we may actually have some of that benefit, but there is no reason why we can't grow high-grade trees, have multiple products, have multiple values at the same time. So generally, we follow cost share guidelines, and generally that is minimal cost. We're planting a few trees per acre at wide spacings. A lot of times they're single species. And just because they're cost share programs, we're trying to make dollars go further. We try to minimize afforestation costs. So we're planting at what? 10 by 10, 12 by 12, and expecting that to be like a natural stand that may regenerate with thousands of seedlings per acre? Yeah. So you see some of the problems we have associated there. So a lot of our afforestation results today are pure species planting. It's always fun. We're talking about trying to do conservation values with oaks. Did oaks forests start as oak pure stands in the regeneration stage? Usually not. A lot of our planted stands have poor form, many and large branches because of the wide spacings. There's a lack of canopy stratification. You plant one species, everything grows at the same rate. Wide spacings give you very late canopy closure. I'm going to show you some data on that. Then you start getting crown abrasion. And this is something that we talked about a long time ago, but there hasn't been a lot of research on it. And I actually did have a grad student a few years ago start looking at physics of crown abrasion. It's very interesting. I'll show you some data on that. And there is some of this thought that, well, if we plant trees at wide spacings, some natural regeneration will fill in between those empty places. And has that occurred? And generally, it has not. So this is your typical hardwood, pure oak plantation. What's the wildlife value of that plantation? What is the timber value of that plantation? And I think we could all probably look at that and say, the trees are growing, they're surviving, and so forth. We don't have any understory in there, do we? And we've got a lot of branches. And that gives you an idea of what might happen with log quality as far as wildlife habitat is minimal in those sites too. And I believe, Emil, this was a stand we went into one time. And we always thought that, you can see the oaks, they're out there. But look what has come in between these widely spaced oak species. Are we getting anything woody in between those trees, or is it all herbaceous? And there's probably some value to that to some degree, but we're not getting a lot of different woody species in there anyway. So some of my work when I was at Mississippi State was to look at some different type of species and how they interact when they grew together. We did this in natural stands, and we're now putting that into some information and how we work with planted stands. So if you take something like a pure oak plantation as the current crown form, so everything grows about the same rate and so forth. And here's your typical widely spaced, I think this is after the third growing season of cherry bark oak. And again, form's not real good, not a lot of competition to make those trees go up instead of out. We're growing a lot of bushes. And again, how we tend to set up those type of plantations. Now, this is something that Jeff Stringer at the University of Kentucky and I came up with through several planted plantations, but at wide spacings, and the x-axis is ground line diameter, and this is the surface area right here, and it's pretty much a linear relationship, but how long does it take for, depending on your spacing of your planting, for the canopy to close? And what you'll find that at a 12 by 12 spacing, which is really wide, it's going to take, and this is ground line diameter, it's not DBH, but it takes somewhere around 11 to 12 years to close that canopy. So are you going to have any good form of those trees when you don't have a canopy closure until it happens at age 12? And this is all due to widely spaced trees. Where if you plant at a narrower spacing, here you get ground line diameter 3.5 inches, and it closes somewhere around 6 years or so. So this gives you some ideas, not only on what kind of form and development you're having on your trees, but also in plantation management. If you're trying to control species, how much does it cost to make sure that you're giving those trees all the resources they need instead of herbaceous vegetation and other things that are coming in taking those resources? So if you're waiting till things close at age 10, 11, 12, how much money are you spending for vegetation control for that amount of time? As compared to something that's closely spaced, albeit costs more because you're planting more seedlings, but your veg control is much less. Chris Oswald was one of my students who really was looking at branch size and occlusion as associated with trying to grow high quality hardwoods in plantations. And one of the previous speakers started talking about, are we growing the kind of trees in plantations, and what are the problems that we're having? And you can look at this, and I hope I got this right, but you can see that here's your central knotty core where you used to have old branches that have pruned off. You see the branch stub. And where the value of the tree is from a quality standpoint is in this clear wood. We were very fortunate to be able to take some logs, gang saw them, and that's what this is sort of illustrating. We gang sawed the logs so we could actually just flip boards and look where the knots were and see how branches pruned off and how that clear wood development occurred. And this is just a simple diagram showing you the boards 1, 2, 3, 4 as you go. And of course, as you get to the closer part of that knotty core, you have more knots because you have more branches initially. As they pruned off and you get to the outer edge, of the boards, you're going to get a lot more clear wood. There's where your value in hardwood management is. And then just another diagram trying to show the difference in occluded branches, where this knotty core and where the clear wood is. So if you're trying to grow hardwoods and trying to grow high quality logs, the value is getting these things to prune while the branches are small, which isn't going to happen at wide spacings very often, and then being able to let that diameter growth cover up those old branches to get that clear wood. Now, one way of doing that is growing a pure oak plantation and going in and pruning. Now, how many people do that? That's a cost, definite cost. But you can see where we have actually gone in and pruned. We've got some major knots there that are going to have to be overgrown. And then how these trees develop, I had another student, and this is really interesting work. It's sort of out of the normal act of doing things, but we were looking at crown abrasion. And he determined with different impact testers, let's see if I got those, that what does it take for a branch, the end of a branch to break? What kind of force does it take? So we took a whole bunch of branches, ends of branches really, not branches, and ran them through this impact tester to find out the force it would take to break the branch, okay? And then we put accelerometers on trees, and we actually did it in this plantation right here. But an accelerometer will tell us how that branch moves in the wind, okay? And here's a graph, I believe this is 20 to 25 miles an hour, of how that moves in a three-dimensional face, X and Z here, at that wind speed. Now, what kind of force and acceleration does that branch move at? And we did this for multi-species, and what we found, and this is not surprising if you think about the physiology, but these numbers in red is the force it would take at different wind speeds, and you're using metric here, unfortunately, but it is metric. But this was the force that it would take to break. If you had it at these wind speeds, you notice the force that occurs, crown frictions, it happens a lot. And what we have found out over time, I may be getting ahead of myself, yes, this crown abrasion is that, especially when oaks rub together, I call it the belligerent oak syndrome, is they start rubbing each other. And what do you think happens when they start rubbing each other, trying to create space during different windstorms? The ends of the branches might break, but oak is very belligerent. It's very stout because it generally grows one flush and hardens off each year, right? Okay? What happens is the flowers and the acorns and ends of branches and buds break off. So when you have oak in pure plantations, we're not producing mast in those situations when those crowns are crowded up against each other. The only mast that might be produced is in the very top of the tree where it's not rubbing. So we're planting oaks at wide spacings for conservation values, especially for mass production. Are we getting it? Not very often. I've been in some CRP and WRP plantations, pure oak, widely spaced, 30 years old, not producing acorns. And it's probably because of this. Genetics can play a role too, and there is work going on to try to figure out characteristics such as forking and epicormic branches and poor stem form, stem blemishes, to find out what we need to select against. And we do have combined selection, including information concerning defects, and can we provide gains in growth and quality based on that. So Randy has several studies. This is just one where he's looking at different species with different herbaceous controls and so forth. And just to go through this, with survival, he has data for survival, height, and DBH after 20 years, and he can select certain families that will probably have better genetic control of quality. Typically, height growth is reduced as a seedling. Anyone who's planted oaks knows that they don't grow very well the first year after you plant them because they are put in a root system. So accelerated height growth following root production. Trees tend to overtop herbaceous competitions. Crowns expand. Once we get that crown closure, then that tree competition is generally followed by suppression and mortality. Thus, you have to thin early because of that. So anyway, there are some strategic selections associated with that. And if it's a pure species plantation, you're going to have to probably thin and prune if you're going to get quality. And at the same time, you're probably going to have to thin and prune to get mass production so the crowns aren't rubbing together. The other alternative is mixed plantations, and we've started looking at that now. This is a 3-year-old stand of sweet gum, cherry bark oak, and sweet gum crown, very pyramidal, much like pine. It won't overtop the oak, so the oak comes up through pretty well. Spacing, site suitability for the species that you're doing, the growth rate of the species, crown form. You know, we get a lot of stratified, even age stands. Why? John sort of picked up on this earlier today. Different species grow at different rates. So one species that's 4 inches in diameter may be the same age as a species that's 12 inches in diameter because they grow at different rates. So the concepts here are forcing height growth, reduce the amount of pruning, limit branch size, avoid epicormic branching. And we've been planting hardwoods, I think, with a pine mentality. Well, in pine, we're growing for fiber. We're growing for volume. With hardwood, we're growing for grade. And that's very important. And typically, to have good grade, we need crown stratification to have that quality in the bulb. And this was some work that I did years ago, sweet gum and cherry bark. Sweet gum always grows faster than cherry bark, but the cherry bark is not overtopped and tends to come through and then suppress the sweet gum at latter ages. These crown forms are important. This is sweet gum, this is oak. Put them together, look what happens. So again, here is 2 different sizes of trees that started at the same time, 2 different species. So the impact of silvicultural decisions on production of quality hardwood, it's very critical because what you're trying to, again, is play back and forth between spacing, mixtures, and thinning schedules. And without stratification, crown development may be hindered. Without stratification, you may get heavy competition and get stagnation. And without stratification, stem quality may be negatively influenced. Characteristics of trees with wide spacings that we've all seen. Characteristics of trees with close spacings. Again, getting back to that graph, this is very important in knowing when the canopy is going to close and what spacing that you would like to plant. And what we suggest is planting more trees per acre, which usually costs more. But you may get both benefits from the wildlife and timber business too. Now, I want to just give you a little bit of a background on, well, it costs more. You can't get around costs. Well, there isn't anything that says that you have to evenly distribute trees on an acre. Most of the cost share guidelines typically say so many trees per acre, but do they say how you have to plant them? Maybe we plant them closer together on an acre. And then we have open areas for conservation, natural re-veg, whatever you want. So we're concentrating competition control on smaller areas, reducing cost. And if you start looking at this with water quality and so forth in riparian areas, you can come up with all kinds of schemes. And to follow up, we planted my dream study a few years ago, where we're planting different spacings with different species combinations. And showed this before, but this is forward growing season, 6x6, oak and gum. And you can see that the gum initially, this is an 8x8. Gum grows very well initially, but the oak can keep on coming up. We grew it with poplar. Poplar's overtopping the oak, not unexpected. What would happen if we coppiced the poplar right now? Be pretty neat to look at. That's what we're going to do. You still, I mean, this is pretty neat. We got poplar, it's 20 feet, and we got cherry bark oak, it's 12 feet tall. After 4 years. There is a difference in spacing. Our ones that are 6x6, the oak are about 12 feet. At 10x10, the oak are about 6 or 7 feet. So it makes a lot of difference whether they bush out or they go up. And this is one with the black cherry that we're using, and here is the oak, and here's the cherry. Cherry's sort of interesting. It doesn't make a commercial species where we're at, but it's a very sparse crown, so light gets through the cherry, and the oak keeps on growing. So here's my take-home messages. I'm close. Most natural hardwood stands develop as mixed species, not as single species. I don't know why we started trying to plant single species, because I guess it was just easier that way. Produce a forest that's more natural in appearance. Stand development is quite different from monocultures. You need canopy stratification. You generally want to produce branch-free, high-grade timber, more than single species stands. Vertical and horizontal structure, which everybody desires. Different species grow at different rates. More flexible management opportunities, and less chance, if you have this crown stratification, you get this less chance of crown abrasion and more area for mass production. I know I'm very close, but this is lots of fun stuff to do when you start trying to play these games of crowns and diameter growth and so forth. Thank you.
One question.
It's somewhat about White River National Wildlife Refuge, where I've been working for most of my career in East Arkansas, along just off from the Mississippi River, several areas of conservation. As outlines the boundary of the refuge. A lot of this symposium comparing desired forest conditions with timber management. You get the realization that DFCs are really recommendations that can be implemented or intermixed with your intermediate treatments. They can be adapted to any landowner's objectives. And the DFC is really to increase diversity at multiple scales. Like I was talking about the forest scale and the stand scale. But it's important for wildlife to have diversity of species, age classes, if the site or the type allows for that, and the structure that's the food and cover for wildlife. I don't have any pictures of pretty people, so I thought to take pictures of pretty trees. Not uncommon stand in White River bottoms, multi-canopy, but there's really not any understory to speak of that the wildlife really thrive in. We have a lot of single canopy forests as well, though, that is really lacking in the wildlife habitat characteristics that we see. I had a double great grandfather that cut logs out of White River bottoms a little over 100 years ago. So there's been disturbances over the years in those forests. Of course, I'm not going to read the slides to you. I think most folks from Arkansas can read. Surely everybody from Mississippi can.
Hope so.
And managing the forest, we use variable retention thinning. We mark trees from 6 inches up to 40 inches for commercial sale, 40 plus. I've marked a few 60-inch oaks in my career. We also mark less than 6 inches. We don't expect it to be sold. We just require they cut it down, run it over some of the mid-story control to be sure you get the sunlight you're seeking. A lot of that management is, basal areas often start off about 110, and we'll thin it down to about 60. We use variable spacing, which is really quite similar to what you're going to hear when Steve Meadows talked about the quality timber management, is managing to keep the trees that are desirable form and desirable characteristics more so than just having even spacing regardless of the quality of the trees. Variety of logging equipment, as we were geared up in the last year or so, we're getting diversity in the logging equipment that we even use to get the work done. We're even using off-road trucks and ferrying them across the river. A lot of conventional logging equipment. And there's the results of the results at the thinning. Here's the pre-cut in the background and just cut in the foreground. If you don't have some of this, you can't release it. There, Whitey Rogers retired from potlatch, now retired from Fish and Wildlife, holding on some of that same oak regeneration right behind the cut. Here's some cherry bark. 16 years after a variable retention cut, we cut in 88. It's going to be cut again this summer. That's 25 years between those thinnings. We'd really like to have done it 15 or 20 years, but who out here has enough help to get done all they need to do? Anybody? We can't get to it fast enough, but it does occur. Downward distribution. It's a semi-log graph, so being a reverse J curve, if it was an ordinary graph, but being semi-log, it'd be a straight line if it was a perfect curve. The dark red is all species, the blue is red oak, and the pink is overcut. From seedling size to 52-inch DBH. That's about a 600-acre stand. Notes that the oaks are a good portion of the tree classes in all diameter classes. So I've been observed at White River, the oaks have been regenerated and maintained via canopy gap provided by variable retention thinning. And we also noticed another place in Arkansas. We noticed it on Cache River, we noticed it over on Balamita, the Groove Isle, Saline River, the Washita River, and that's just in my experiences. The key is to get oak regeneration established and then released by cutting in all diameter classes. And that's actually what Putnam advocated when you look at his table on uneven age management. Each time there's a cut, there's a significant number of trees in smaller diameter classes that would have been contributing to the shade from the mid-story. And the key is to cut all those, where in reality, when I was a timber beast, we were high grading. We cut the logs and left everything else out there. And we were not cutting in those smaller diameter classes, we were not getting the sunshine that Putnam advocated. So we learned from those, and we do cut in all diameter classes to get the full array of sunshine in these thinnings. Those are some 40-inch cherry barks. again, 15 years post-thinning, about the same time took pictures of the cherry bark regeneration under where there was some hackberry in the stand. Variable retention thinning provides a variety of sunlight levels through the stand, where all the environmental variables that occur out there are almost impossible for us to account for. But with having the variety of light levels and disturbance in the stand, if the conditions are right, oaks are going to find just the right conditions somewhere in that stand to get started or to thrive. Partial disturbances from thinnings or windstorms doesn't always cause epicormic branching. Trees that are vigorous often retain their grade, and they really pack on the diameter growth with repeated releases that allow them to expand the crown. There's a large cherry bark, 22 years post-thinning, no epicormic branches to speak of. When you do those thinnings, you get this explosion of herbaceous growth that really provides the food and cover that's vital to the survival of young wildlife, turkey poults, deer fawn, squirrels. In our area, when we flood, it's ducks, wood ducks in the spring. It's even the small fish that go out into the floodplain really thrive with that type of structure, that type of food source out there. So these multiple layers of canopy is what we're striving to achieve by following the DFC recommendations. It's a 60-inch Knotty, 44-inch Delta post oak, 72, 73-inch cottonwood. But variable retention is not the only thing we've done. I like Dr. Hodges mentioned of the other fellow saying a single cut shuttlewood. We've done some of those too. 5-acre patches done for research work. We've had 80-acre clear cuts by the previous landowner. They're up to 40 years old. Oaks are a small portion of the composition in those stands after anywhere from 5, 10, and up to 40 years. These patches are not always successfully regenerated oaks. In fact, we've not found any of them on our 160 acres that successfully regenerated oaks. 2 weeks ago, we had a tour at White River. We took folks to a 2.5-acre spot that I know we had oak regeneration when we made the group selection cut, and we found one stump sprout that in that area had all regenerated to ash and sycamore. But we think those oaks got killed during subsequent flood, got overtopped after leaf out, something took those oaks out of that stand, and those things have come in. So even if you have the best of conditions, you're not guaranteed to get oak regeneration. So we think uneven age management of White River has allowed oaks to regenerate, maintain presence of overstory, and has not resulted in shade tolerant dominating the forest. And of course, every place is different. It takes an individual evaluation of each stand, the stand conditions. We just can't blanket say this will work here, it'll work everywhere for any of these management systems. Wanted to touch on economics, because if you don't have a market, you can't hardly do anything with the forest. So we grabbed some information about what our most recent management's been doing. Very successful in sales, and having managed it now for 60 plus years. And all I'm doing is getting to continue what other good folks have done before me. I've gotten the benefit from having that advanced regeneration established. I got information from a couple of consultants in East Arkansas. They're having success doing very similar type of work. I was looking for my time. How much time do I have? We early? Well, I want to touch on just one thing. We did have a forest management review. A couple of highlights. It appears to be a 3A stand over coastal forest, scattering of very large, older trees, large number of smaller pole-sized trees, probably a result of the first cut. Large amount of regeneration, varying in size, from even small poles. The refuge staff recognize uneven age nature, to utilize advanced regeneration, to increase it. We also increase the stocking of red oaks, perpetuate the uneven age conditions done by group selection of the larger trees, thinning the mid-sized trees. Most regeneration openings less than ½ acre in size. Red oak regeneration is abundant on most of the red oak sites. And the participants in that forest management review were John Hodges, Cindy Johnson with the University of Georgia, Bob Johnson from here at Stonewall, Ray Carper, Fish and Wildlife, Chuck Hunter, Skeeter Reeves, Ty Stewart, all Fish and Wildlife. So I've been fortunate to get to work where there's a lot of advanced regeneration, and we just keep managing that. Won't work everywhere, but it can work somewhere. Questions?
We have time for one quick question.
Jeff,
Go ahead.
do you recall off the top of your head, metal composition changes in the last 40 to 50 years on that refuge?
No, I don't. And we're seeing some hydrological changes because of works of man. From some sites are wetter, some are drier. But we do have continuous forest inventory plots. We've not had a remeasurement to see what the difference has been since they were established. Thanks.
See if there's any questions.
Any questions?
Yeah,
Steve, what did you say in the last cut your residual basal area was?
I'm sorry, what?
On your last cut, what was your residual basal area?
63. But I want to get everybody, everybody talks about basal area and everybody thinks about basal area. And if I went through a presentation where I didn't even mention the word basal area, people would get upset. Okay? But I'm trying to get people to think away from basal area. Because what we found was we got the same response whether we cut it to 50 square feet or 80 square feet. As long as it comes in that range, we're going to get about the same response. So it doesn't matter that it's 63.
I would just follow understand.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
Sounds like you're getting close on this last stand to start thinking about the regeneration.
To do what?
To start thinking about the
Yes.
regeneration. And it sounds like that 68 square feet may be, from what we heard, maybe a little bit too high.
It could be.
Going, when you start to get maybe within that 10 years, when you think you might be taking off the overstore there, cutting to a lower level than just the prescription.
Well, yes, I would not have a problem with that at all. In this particular case, this is a thinning, okay? And Randy, where's Randy? Randy and I were talking about this at lunch. He was asking, are we in that slide? Go back. That slide there. Are we particularly, specifically trying to get regeneration? In my system, the way it is now, no, we're not. It's strictly a thinning. We're focused on the residual trees, okay? In reality, you should be thinking about regeneration, okay? As you get late into the rotation, you should be thinking about regeneration. This should be a part of a silvicultural system where you're trying to accomplish whatever your objective is throughout the rotation, not just during the regeneration phase, not just during the intermediate management phase. They're all part of the same thing. So in reality, we would be trying to look at regeneration, which might mean we might cut a little bit heavier. We might, if we had a particularly large crown tree, we might leave that tree even though, it was one that might be designated to be cut. This is 63 square feet of basal area, which we've heard roughly 50, okay, is maybe ideal. You also have to remember that 63 square feet of basal area is concentrated in just a handful of pretty large trees. And so you're gonna have This stand right here is not, that's not 63, but the simulated stand was. So you're gonna have more open area than even what you see in this stand, I think. Yeah,
I don't know what the stand had in it in terms of a mid-story. In this case, it looks like if it was there, you slashed it as part of the thing.
yes,
But if it was sugarberry and elm and red maple, maybe you would, in conjunction with the thinning, want to do stem injection, because otherwise you're just gonna get a bunch of sprout
Yeah.
regrowth.
right. This stand was heavy to elm. There was some hackberry in there, but it was mostly elm and some hickory, okay? And the logging operation, although we did not specifically request the logger to knock those trees down, you can see they got knocked down. And, yeah, they're gonna sprout. And we'll see what happens, you know. I mean, this stand did have a dense mid-story. And it's essentially gone.
Is it even age stand?
Yeah. Okay, thank you.